Hi, this is Matt Bradley-Tschirgi with another look at Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster. This time we'll be comparing the music from all the different versions of Final Fantasy I could find with the music in the new Final Fantasy Pixel 1 Remaster. Although Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 aren't coming out on Pixel Remaster on Steam in the United States until July 28th, 2021, if you look and dig a bit on YouTube, you can find the Square-Enix Japanese page, and they have a great 30-minute video, all in Japanese, no English subtitles, unfortunately, where they talk to series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi and the composer Nobuo Uematsu and others. And when they talk to the composer, they play in the background what the Overworld theme and the battle theme for Final Fantasy 1 I believe will sound like in Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster. So we're going to take a listen of those clips after listening chronologically to see how these different musical themes have changed over time. So why should you listen to me talking about video game music? Well, way back in 2005, I started podcasting with one of the very first video game music podcasts out there called the Super KOOPA TROOPA Show from 2005 to I believe like early 2007, maybe, or late 2006, something around then. In college at Savannah College Art and Design, I hosted a show called Do the Mario that was video game music themed from 2003 to 2005. And more recently, like 4 years back, for KBOO FM in Portland, Oregon, I did a show called Nintendon't. There you go, those are my bona fides. Why don't we take a look at the music? So we're going to take a look at the music chronologically, which each theme, and me talking about what makes them different from each other. Here is the Overworld theme from the original Famicom version of Final Fantasy. Let's take a quick listen. I'm just going to do short clips, not the whole thing, because they're 2-minute clips apiece. So that piece is with the NES sound chip, or Famicom sound chip, of course, and it has a feeling of you're going on an adventure. That's what an overworld theme should be, because you're walking around on the overworld map in these RPGs a lot, figuring out what is what and what's going on, right? You're trying to get to the next dungeon, you're grinding, trying to get your guys stronger. Really fun, has propulsion to it. It's more limited how it sounds with that chiptune thing. I happen to like how that sounds. A lot of people might think it sounds kind of annoying or like screeching to the ears. But I grew up with it, so I like all that stuff. There's tons of soundtracks, official soundtracks you can buy, even on vinyl of these old games. Some of them they sell in the United States. They happen to make a lot of them available on things like Apple Music and Spotify and Amazon Music, those major services. So if you like that and have a subscription to those streaming services, that's kind of the best way to do it. Or, you can also track down the albums, which are out of print. That can also be expensive. That's another story. We heard how it sounded like on the NES. Let's move on to how the Overworld theme sounds in the WonderSwan. So WonderSwan Color was a portable that was Japan only, and Square-Enix did remakes of Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 4 for it. It was more powerful than a Game Boy Color, I would say. It had a lot of SNK fighting games on it with like the chibi super cute graphics. I've never held one in my hand or played one, but the specs look pretty impressive for the time, and it had quite a big system library, albeit it was Japanese only. So we're going to hear what that same Overworld theme sounds like for the WonderSwan Color. So you could hear the sound channels there going around, right? It didn't sound bad. It could play more than one music tone simultaneously, which the NES couldn't really do. It sounded better than the original Game Boy. It still kind of sounds a bit chiptune-y, kind of PC speakery at points, but it fulfills that kind of epic nature, kind of gives it a bit more flair. This one sounds a little bit better than the NES, but it's not like radically different. Later on, really near the end of the PlayStation 1 life, before, I think the PS2 might have even been out at this time. I can't quite remember, but Final Fantasy Origins was out for PlayStation 1. It was a compilation with Final Fantasy 1 and 2, and this is the first time Final Fantasy 2 was legally available in the United States, although the original came out on Famicom and at one point was going to be translated for the NES and so forth. So this, the PlayStation, the sound chip, is much, much better than the WonderSwan or the Famicom, and we're going to take a listen to the main theme. I think this has, what I like about it is it sounds very, more like John Williams-y, very orchestral, and more like a full arrangement you would hear. So what you could hear there is the percussion was pretty forward in that arrangement. It had kind of the trilling flutes in the background, and it even had that bit of an intro build-up before the actual main theme started. I think that's a pretty good arrangement. It really sounds like something from a movie, which I think is what they're going for in the Final Fantasy series. As they went past these kind of initial titles we saw in, or we're going to see in the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters 1 through 6, they kept on wanting to be more like a movie with these really long movie sequences, right? With the CG where the characters look better than they do in the main game. So that arrangement for Final Fantasy Origins PlayStation 1 is pretty good. Next was a release on Game Boy Advance that was a port of Final Fantasy Origins. In the United States, it was called Final Fantasy Dawn of Souls. The Japanese title was Final Fantasy 1 and 2 Advance, which kind of makes more sense to me anyway, because the later titles were like Final Fantasy 4 Advance and 5 Advance and 6 Advance and all of that jazz. So the Game Boy Advance chip, it sounded like a Super Nintendo, and it looked like a Super Nintendo really with the graphics. The chip might not have been quite as good as the SNES, but it was pretty close. Probably a bit more compressed, but that's a good comparison. So as we hear this arrangement of the Overworld theme, it's really a few steps down from the PlayStation 1 version. So let's take a listen. You hear how crunchy that sounds in there, and especially the high end is a bit shrill with the flutes in the background. This could be better, but it's not. It's a downgrade. However, if you want to have Final Fantasy games on the go that's not on a mobile device like an iPhone or a Samsung or Android phone, right? You can do much worse than have the Game Boy Advance and have the... you can get, Final Fantasy 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 on those advanced cartridge collections. That's well worth it, in my opinion, because they have some exclusive dungeons and stuff that are not in these Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters. For more information about that, you can check out the video I did last week about that Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster Q&A. Link is in the show notes. The clip we hear of what appears to be the arrangement of the Overworld Final Fantasy theme from Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster. You have like the interviewees and all these people talking excitedly in this clip. So it's a bit, you have to kind of listen past that to hear what this music sounds like. So here is the main theme as it's going to likely sound in the Pixel Remaster.
音楽をもう全部作り直してやってるんですけどね。オリジナルに忠実にっていうのが一番最初の考えの中にあって、あれしてたんですけど、なかなか。
Notice here how it sounds more lush. It sounds more full with the orchestral arrangements. The pace, the tempo seems a little bit slower than what was in the PlayStation Origins arrangement. It's exciting. It's neat to see a new spin with kind of how high quality current music samples are. The changed music is one of the things I'm most excited about in these Final Fantasy 1 Pixel Remasters. I love the NES and Famicom original sounds to the music. I always like that chiptune stuff, but if you're gonna redo it, like really give it a serious go with modern tech, and that's what they're doing, and it sounds pretty exciting. The battle scene, even different. We'll get to that. We're gonna do the battle music and see what it sounds like for the different versions of Final Fantasy 1, including on the Pixel Remaster, based on this short clip from a Japanese Square-Enix video. where they interview Nobuo Uematsu about the arrangements he does for these games. So let's take a listen to the Final Fantasy I battle music, which is quite simple to some of the other arrangements. It even sounds a bit like an old cell phone ringtone on my old Nokia with the flip phone thing, the beep, 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 beep. It is quite primitive. This is not one of my favorite Final Fantasy battle themes, if I'm being honest, but hey, it's the first. So we'll take a listen to it. So with that theme, you get kind of a sense of anxiety, a sense of danger, and it's this NES arrangement, the original arrangement of it is a bit sparse. It's not one of my favorites. I think the boss music is better. So when we move from that onto how it's done on the WonderSwan, I think you'll find this version has a bit more punch. You get that bass in there, although you do get the kind of crunchiness of the WonderSwan color music. That bass that comes forward makes it a bit more driving, makes it a bit more interesting, a bit more flair. And on the coming up next is the Dawn of Souls arrangement on the Game Boy Advance, and coming up next is the arrangement of Final Fantasy Origins of the battle theme. It has just a lot of flavor to it. Yeah, so I mean, like in the Overworld theme, the drums come through really hard, the snares. The brass, I think, sounds a bit awful. It's tough to do brass right. Nowadays it's easier, the samples are much better, but sometimes it can sound a bit tinny, just a bit cheap sounding. Sounds like, like a kid's piano or something. But still, that arrangement, has real punch, is a lot more exciting than what we heard before. And if we see how they, down mixed this Final Fantasy Origins arrangement to the Game Boy Advance, it really takes a hit in quality and sounds tacky. Not one of my favorite versions. And it's just like the crunchiness with this kind of arrangement doesn't quite work for me, but you might have a different opinion. Here's the battle scene from Final Fantasy on Game Boy Advance. Yeah, there's a lot of reverb on there that makes it sound like everything's bouncing off of each other. This could be much, much better sounding. I think if they had reduced the instrumentation, it might have punched through a bit clearer. Instead, it feels kind of like a wall of noise. So we have all those arrangements. People might be asking, okay, what about the PSP titles? Why didn't you put those on there? And A, it's tough to find the PSP music for Final Fantasy I. B, it sounds basically just like the PlayStation 1 version. I didn't think it sounded radically different enough where I had to play those clips separately. But if you'd like me to look at the PSP music someday, I can figure something out. So put something down in the comments below. And all of that. So now we're going to hear the what everyone really wants to hear, right? What the Pixel Remastered versions of the battle music sounds like. This is very guitar forward. This sounds very much like the prog rock, Black Mages kind of arrangements we would hear in those battle medleys on some of those albums where Nobuo Uematsu played live with his band, where they kind of lean on the rock angle of the compositions. Here is what it sounds like. And just like that first clip from the Pixel Remaster music, you have Uematsu and others speaking, so you really have to... I tried to boost the volume a bit without making it sound too bad, but just do your best to listen to this and see what you think.
それが驚きのバトル曲。どれだろう。どこだ。あ、でもそうか。でも FC 時代ですもんね。ファミコン時代。そう。
So I mean that was very, very brief, but I like that arrangement better than the Pixel Remaster Overworld Final Fantasy I arrangement we heard. You can hear more of that guitar going through, more driving. It's fun. It has a lot to it, and As I mentioned before, video game music is something I love deeply, and it's by far what interests me the most about these Final Fantasy Pixel remasters or these arrangements overseen by Nobuo Uematsu. So the game comes out July 28th. I'll be doing live streams of it. I'll probably start with like a live stream, making it kind of doing an overview, maybe like the first dungeon or so of the first few titles, and then I'll do proper from the beginning. Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3, which will keep me busy. But I also have like the old Steam versions I've purchased before of the 3D versions, right, of Final Fantasy 3 and 4. Those are ports of the Nintendo DS ones that have extra content. And also I have the ports of the mobile ones for 5 and 6, which have the extra content and the kind of pixel graphics people really don't like. But it'll be interesting to talk about and play through those as much as I can before we get the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters of 4, 5, and 6, which will be coming out sometime later this year. Recall in the announcement for Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster for Final Fantasy 1 through 6, it said in the summer. As of this recording, it's July. I would think late August we might see it. I've also been hearing some rumblings about September. So we'll see what happens. I'm at Bradley-Tschirgi. Hope you enjoyed this discussion of Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters. If you like this video, hit the like button below and hit the subscribe button below or whatever it is on the screen. I have books you can buy about video games and movies, including the first English language book on the films of Uwe Boll covering his video game movies. Find those at matwbt.com. You can listen to my movie and video game podcast, SEQUELCAST 2, that I host with Thrasher and Alex Miller at sequelcast2.com. And you can follow me on Twitter at matwbt. I hope you enjoyed this discussion of analyzing the Final Fantasy music from the original Famicom release to the new Final Fantasy Pixel Remaster that's coming out in just a few days in the United States, July 28th. I'm really excited. Hella might say, you spoony bard.